think we could get started, Mark. Like,
Yeah.
12:31.
All right, let's light this candle. This is we're excited. I think for the first time this week we saw the SharePoint App Bar in some of our tenants, and because we do what we do, we're each in like 5 to 10 tenants per each week. So we see it in some, we don't see it in others. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but we're excited to talk about the SharePoint App Bar. So we'll drill in. You know that each of us brings their own unique perspective to the app bar. Some of us think of it from a dev point of view, some from an IT pro point of view. And we're going to hit three main things. Like, what is the app bar? If you haven't seen it before, it's new to you. We'll talk about how you plan for it, and we'll leave you, of course, as always, with some resources for getting started with the app bar. So who wants to start on the what is it?
Happy to jump in. So it appears along the left navigation on all SharePoint sites, and there's 4 different components. What people are talking about the most is the global navigation, which you can base off of a hub site or a home site. Then the second panel is for frequent and followed sites. So this will be different for each user. Then there's recommended news and recent files, which will both also be different for each user based off of your permissions.
So Emily, three out of 4 of these things already exist in the best kept secret in SharePoint, right?
Absolutely. SharePoint start page being brought to the front.
Right. So it's those 3 are components that already exist that too few people know about, right? But they're already there.
And for those who don't know, that's when you click on the word SharePoint at the top navigation from any site, and it brings you to that page.
Yeah.
You'll see.
And not to digress too much, I get to it the other way. So I pulled this out of like a Microsoft marketing spiel almost. I started office.com, and then you get there from clicking SharePoint, and office.com also takes you to the SharePoint start page. But I agree, not enough people know about it and go there.
All roads lead to Rome.
But that wasn't built in a day, so remember that.
No.
Let's talk nav, because we were introducing a new nav component, and that has downstream ramifications in other places.
So there's quite a bit of navigation within Microsoft 365. So you can see the little green box we have is this new global nav that we're going to be getting with this SharePoint app bar. You're probably already familiar with the orange box, which is our hub site nav, the purple box, which is your site level nav called the top nav. And then, of course, another piece of navigation is also that app launcher up in the top left that takes you to the different solutions across Microsoft 365. So that's for a communication site. And if we take a peek at a team site, the only difference is that we don't call it the top nav, we call it the quick launch along the left.
Yeah, and this is one of those, I think when we were discussing this Monday, we were all grousing about all the different navigations. Oh, yay, another navigation option to go with the 16 we've already got. To make it even worse, these have multiple names. So like in some places in the API and in documentation and stuff, the purple one is called the left nav. I'll let you all figure out why it's called the left nav. In other places, it's called the quick launch. And depending on why it's being referenced as to where it is or what it does, it's got different names. And the same for the top one. That's called global nav or top nav. They're the same thing, but depending on where you are in the interface, they've got different names. So Microsoft really kind of bungled this one. But it's good to know all the names for all the navs, because there's going to be a quiz at the end of this session. And
it's even worse if you talk to your developers, because there are navigation providers. And let's skip that part.
So maybe extra credit on the quiz is the other name, the alternate name for the app launcher.
Oh yeah. Did M say it? I can't remember.
The waffle.
No. Our breakfast, our favorite breakfast
waffle.
Food, right?
Yep. Krista got it in the chat. Yep.
The other thing to note on communication sites, some of you, depending on where you've been and how long you've been working with modern sites for, may have created your own global navigation. Like I work, several of us have worked on clients for whom we've done it, et cetera. And there's custom global navigation that sits on top of this. It's going to require some planning, right, to make sure all of these things, site nav, hub nav, global nav, all line up.
That's an app extension customer.
Thank you. So Derek, you did some pre-work this week. Want to tell us about it?
Yeah. So I late last week, I put out a poll just asking how folks were feeling about the app bar, whether they've seen it, whether they want it, haven't seen it, or whether they're planning to turn it off. We got the most. We've been running these little polls for some of our questions for Asks and Praxis, and we actually got the most responses, both from the number of votes and the generation of community comments that we have so far. I mean, you can see generally more than 50, I mean, like 70, 80% of folks are really looking forward to it. They have seen it and they want it, or they haven't quite seen it yet and it's on their plan. A small minority of folks are planning to turn it off, and that we are planning on talking about that in some on one of the slides in a little bit. It generated quite a bit of community conversations just about sort of where it is, what it is, how to turn it on. So it was really a great exercise in community.
I'm in the group. I'm in the turn it off camp, right? Because again, I've been working with. We have custom global nav, and it's going to be redundant for a little while at least.
Yeah, I think my comment on this subject was that I felt like, there's some who will totally benefit, there's some who will totally not benefit, and there's some who it will muck up the works. So it really depends, and the fact that you cannot forever turn it off seems to me to be an issue.
I'm with you, Mike. I'm in the turn it off camp. From a navigation perspective and from a UX sort of clustering of stuff perspective, I think having so many navigation components clustered up in that top left-hand quarter is really, really challenging, and having everything do something different just really doesn't appeal to me from a visual standpoint.
Sure, but if I needed global nav and I didn't have custom global nav already, I'd probably be happy that this was coming, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, it meets an unmet need.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a small tenant, having that nav on the left there to get to your site or whatever quicker, I don't think there's anything wrong with that if you're not doing it some other way.
Yep. All right, let's talk about if you don't see it yet. Just you, Mark?
There's with different changes that are coming out from Microsoft, they all come out in waves, and it can take a while, and it's not always clear who can see what and when. This one looks like it's visible earlier if you have targeted release for selected users on, and that's what's shown in this screenshot. So you wouldn't do this in your production tenant. Ideally, your production tenant is on standard release for everyone. That's really where things should be. Lots of us have developer tenants or personal tenants where we have targeted release for everyone, and we weren't seeing the app bar. So we saw a tweet from, I can't remember who it was. I'd love to give credit, but
I think it was Joanne. I think it was.
Somebody needs to reboot Mark. Somebody reboot Mark.
Yep. So, Mark, you're back.
Yeah. Well, Joanne asked the question. Somebody else answered it.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I was legit.
No, you were frozen though, Mark.
You were frozen.
Well, I was also frozen. That's what I do.
So one thing I wanted to talk about here, and I think do we have a slide about the dev tenants? Is that on the next slide, or was that this one?
I think we just have a resources link.
Okay. So I wanted to, as an IT pro kind of guy, this is one of those things I heard a phrase a long time ago. The question isn't whether you have a test environment. The question is whether you have a production environment, meaning you shouldn't test in production, obviously. So Julie's got a great blog post. It was so great that I blogged about it myself, where there's a way to get free developer tenants. And so there's no excuse to test things in production. You should get one of these free dev tenants and test to your heart's content there. And actually, so I'm just put it in the chat. The other thing about this particular thing, the targeted release thing, the way that I kind of understand it is there's a way to do it for your tenant and a way to do it for your users. And there's some frustration around the way that you can't do it for both. Kind of the way I wrap my head around that is for folks that ever dealt with on-prem SharePoint. It's kind of the idea that if you do it at the tenant level, you're installing a solution. you're lighting that up or you're activating that solution. But if you do it at the user level, you're basically turning on an audience. You're adding a person to an audience. So some features come in and are exposed via an audience. Some are come in. So that's what this kind of helped me understand why it's some and why it's the other. But tested and test.
All right. So if we see the app bar, we don't see the global nav.
There's an additional step in your settings. So you just have to make sure that you go and toggle that on. And that's when you can choose whether you're going to be pulling the navigation from that hub or home site.
You can
A
also,
couple things we can do to plan. Sorry, go ahead, Derek.
yeah, if you go back one slide, Mike. While you can also select either the hub or the global nav or your home site navigation, there's a little link right above it that lets you customize it. So it doesn't have to be direct. It's whatever your starting point is. So you can use your hub site your hub navigation and then go in and customize it. The other thing is that it also does support audience targeting in the navigation elements. So for instance, and because this is global, it goes on everything. You may want to hide some things from external users, or you may want to hide some things from folks that aren't in the managers group or whatever. So you can definitely use those components to make some customizations here.
Super important, Derek. Thanks. I know we talked about that the other day, and I think that'll be crucial to some folks who are thinking about their content in a more targeted way. Anything else to cover on planning? I think we did. Oh, we talked about raising the technical literacy too.
Yeah, so one thing, because people are talking so much about the global navigation, I think that people are forgetting about the other panels as well and how much value could really be provided there. So teaching your end users to use that star in the top right to follow a site, that it's kind of like a fancy bookmark that's going to be a little bit more useful maybe for some users to have that in global nav than they felt like it was when it was just in that SharePoint start page. And because you're going to have that panel for news and you can't get rid of it, this is a great time to consider transitioning your email communications to SharePoint News as well.
Yeah, and the news that bubbles up is sort of based on the sites you follow too. So that's also useful. Like if you start a site, that has an effect on what news you see if they publish news in more than one site. So.
Yeah, I had a talk with a customer yesterday about the star thing, and they're not used to the SharePoint start page yet because they're moving on-prem. And so he was asking, why would I star this? I'm like, well, it shows up on the SharePoint start page. He's like, I'm never going to go there. I said, but another thing is it's just another indicator to search as to how to bubble things up. So if you star, the sites that you go to, that's how news is, but anything else you do. So just kind of giving SharePoint a little heads up on
the graph signal, right?
Yeah, graph signal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of really basic things like that no one ever tells anyone. It's like the whole
we
thing
told them.
It lands on your desk.
Them.
It lands on your desk, but there's no instruction manual, right? And following sites actually really sort of matters. And you end up following sites that you create. So we're used to following sites because we create sites all the time for people. But your average user has no idea what that is or whether they even can click on it.
Yeah.
So we're at about half our time. I want to stop real quick and just check in if we have any questions that are coming in, or if anybody who's on the line wants to ask any questions about that planning process, et cetera.
We've been answering a ton of questions in the chat, so I think we're pretty good at this point. Yeah, they're pretty much getting answered.
All right. Yeah, I'm following the chat. It's over by Bernie there, so I can.
Your assistant.
Bernie's moderating the chat for us today. Yes.
Yeah. The other thing I'd add to the planning part is, and Mike, you and Julie both mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you have a custom navigation component, an app customizer that you're using for global navigation, this does change sort of the layout of the page. So definitely, this is another thumbs up for the dev tenant. That's the kind of thing that you want to test and make sure that it doesn't break the CSS or the HTML and push things off the page.
Right. So if you build in that standard placeholder space, I think that gets pushed to the right rather than the app bar getting pushed down below your placeholder space, right?
Yes. You would need. It really depends on how you built the HTML and the CSS.
Okay.
But the placeholder is
the
to
placeholder
the right.
gets pushed to the right.
It's pushed to the right. Okay.
Yeah.
And to actually just go back to that. if you are doing something that means that your custom HTML is somewhere other than inside of that placeholder, you should not be doing that. So
Yes.
Stop
DOM
that.
manipulation is bad.
that's called DOM manipulation, and you do not want to do that.
We used to
trying not to
love that
channel-
though.
Yes.
Mark.
Julie, I was trying to channel my inner Julie of like, if you did it like that, you did it wrong. So you don't really deserve our help. But otherwise,
I'm spreading the word. Like, yeah, don't do it that way.
all right. Sounds good. All right, Emily, a little more about planning.
Yeah, so time for the user experience soapbox a little bit. So as you're planning your global navigation, remember things like the Hick-Hyman law. So this is this idea that the more options there are, the longer it takes for us to make a decision. So think about sites like Amazon. Have you ever used their global navigation? You know, usually you're just hopping right to search because it's so unhelpful. You don't want to have every single item possible in your global navigation. You have all of those different tiers that we looked at. You have the hub and the site level navigation. So break it out accordingly and make sure it aligns with people's top tasks, not every single page.
Does Nielsen Norman only use alliterative names like the Cab Calloway law and the Dom
Yep.
DeLuise law?
They steal that
guess
from
so.
Marvel, Peter Parker.
Right.
While you're building your global navigation, make sure you keep your link behavior consistent because you want your end users to be able to predict which are links and which are not. So what I mean by that is if the first tier is all labels, keep them all labels. Don't have your first drop down be a label and your second one be a link that you can click. I will say the SharePoint App Bar, because it doesn't automatically expand, you are going to interact with every single one anyway. So you're still going to have that little hand icon, which is a little bit different than when you were working with the hub site navigation with the mega menus. And when you had a label, it left it as a pointer. So that's slightly confusing for end users. So make sure that keeping that link behavior consistent will be really helpful. Again, align those navigation to top tasks. When you're putting in those different navigation labels, make sure they're clear and front loaded. So for example, if you have something under human resources, you don't want to list it out again, human resources benefits, human resources hiring, you would want to front load those as just benefits or hiring and kind of reduce how much clutter is up in that navigation. And once you think you have something great, make sure you complete that user testing. Remember, you are not the user. You're really close to this and you're spending a lot of time with it. So making sure that you're testing this with about 15 users at a minimum is highly recommended.
Okay. Any changes when, to what you see? Let's talk about what you see on a screen that is not a standard laptop size screen.
I just snuck this slide in because we were talking about it and we didn't have a picture. And since some people haven't seen it, you notice the app bar is at the bottom. Okay, I made my screen a little bit smaller, so it's more of a, sort of a tablet kind of size, though I don't think it's any particular size right here. You notice that you get a little waffle-like thing in the upper left, and then you get the app bar at the bottom. So that's going to be something sort of unique to this app bar. That's not something we've seen in SharePoint. Typically, we don't see things slide all the way down to the bottom in a smaller screen. Derek, I know you have some opinions about this.
This is the one thing, this is out of many things, this is the one that drives me the most crazy about the app bar. I totally enjoy it and like it for the favorited site, for the sites and the news and the documents. I feel like bringing it down to the bottom makes it more like utility-based navigation, which I agree with. But from a global navigation standpoint, it moves it too far from where users are focusing their attention, which is in the top part of the page. And in the top part of the page where we have the waffle and, well, both waffles, well, the waffle and the hamburger and the site nav, I feel like there's too much competition and I feel like it gets lost.
And when you click on one of those icons at the bottom, it takes over the entire screen. So
it does.
you can pretty easily get lost. Like, where am I and how do I get out of here?
There is a close button there to close the panel, but it does completely take over the screen. And I'm not a huge fan of completely hiding the user interface for users.
I just really wish they had put all of this stuff in the waffle. Like, when you click on the waffle and that comes down, I don't know why the waffle couldn't have had like the most frequently used apps at the top that you could have expanded, plus then these 4 other things, and like done away with yet another nav.
I feel like one of these things is not like the other. And I feel like global nav should have been separated out and put somewhere else versus the other 3, which were much more utility based.
We do have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Greg. No. Greg said, I may have missed something at the beginning of the call. Are they doing this as setup for the home site, aka Viva Connections in Teams?
You shut us all up. So
big. Well,
so
I was going to answer, but it's a big answer.
It's a little hard, right? I mean, Viva Connections is a Teams thing that is based on SharePoint. This is the app bar, which is throughout SharePoint. So you're seeing a bit of a convergence on that left rail. But go ahead, Julie. I know you had some other.
No, I was just going to say the Viva Connections thing is an actual app that is surfaced in Teams, and this is a feature of SharePoint. And so they're related sort of because they came out at the same time, and you need the home site for both, but it's not really the same thing. And it has some of the same data, but they're not the same thing under the covers.
But does it establish kind of a pattern similar to the way the app bar works in Teams, right? You've got an app bar down the left-hand column in Teams. So is it a consistent pattern that you're seeing now across Teams and SharePoint?
It is.
That's
And
some of the
okay,
attention
so
there.
he's saying he saw something that requires a V on. Yes, you need a home site for both of these things to work, but they're not the same thing, although they have some of the same data in them. I think that.
Does anybody know if you don't have a home site set, if one will be set for you in October?
Oh, I don't know.
That's a great question.
That is.
I don't know the answer. I was just
And I don't know that we covered it, Derek, but why is October important again for the benefit of the group?
So right now there is the ability to turn off the app bar. Oh, next slide.
Is it? Yeah.
All right. So not to steal Todd's thunder.
No,
Why don't
steal
you go
Todd's thunder, man. Do it.
Yeah, go for it.
Absolutely
Nope,
thunder.
nope,
So
nope.
All right. So go ahead, Todd.
What? So as Derek was going to do a much better job explaining than I will, you can turn this off in PowerShell, but it's temporarily until August 31st, and then everybody gets it, whether you want it or whether you don't.
October, right?
Yeah, October 31st. And I like that they actually put the word temporary in the commandlet. Of course, that's the PNP, so they can call it whatever. But yeah, so starting November 1st, you get it, whether you want it or whether you don't. And there's how you can turn it off temporarily if you'd like to. I begged them to put in a slide with PowerShell, so they threw me a bone.
So I did that for you instead of you doing it, Mr. PowerShell.
I know they're too good to me. There's just I can't.
And apparently we had formatting on the fly as well. That was
I was just
way
I
impressive.
didn't do a very good job formatting it, so I thought I'd fix it.
I want
Jesus.
a PowerShell slide. I want you to build it for me. That's
All right. Can I advance to the next slide, or like 2 or 3
Yeah,
people
let's
working
do
on
that.
it? No, it's
No,
people
let's-
actually working on it.
let's
Is it safe?
The next slide is a picture of our cats.
I'm playing
ahead.
PowerPoint karaoke here today.
Oh God.
All right. What are some of the things you can't do?
Turn it off permanently, we don't think, but now we got to test what happens if there's no home site. Maybe that's the secret.
Maybe
But we
that
won't
is-
know until October.
Oh, we won't know until
True.
October. And one thing that I think is important to note here is the app bar as it stands. Think of that as the first iteration. You know how Microsoft is with version 1s. You know, it's going to do what it does. We're going to have lots of feedback for them. By version 2 or version 3, we'll like it a lot. And I would expect, you notice there's some white space there. I expect that it's probably going to do more things, but we don't know what those things are yet. So you probably want to go along for the ride. So even if you're going to wait until October, don't go into it grudgingly. It's probably going to do some good things for you.
yeah.
The app bar shows everywhere. So I know we mentioned audience targeting. You want to be careful because this means if you have an external sharing site that they're going to see everything in that navigation as well. You can't turn it off just on a specific site. So if you
There's a different answer to that, but it's not clear. where external users may not see the app bar at all.
Mm.
I'm not exactly sure because that would be a big security hole. So you'll want to test it with some external users, but I believe that there's some thinking there. Sorry to negate you.
No, that's great news. I think that makes things a little simpler. Then just be careful on your internal sites with your audience targeting.
Right.
So you can turn it off temporarily, but not permanently. There's no extensibility, right? It's not site specific. You're going to show it or not show it globally, and you've got some responsive design considerations, right? From a limitations point of view, what are the responsive design considerations? Basically, you get what you get. You don't get upset, or is there other things to think
That's
about?
pretty much it. I mean, we put that in there mainly to cover that smaller screen, issue. It does flip down to the bottom at 1024 pixels wide. So if you're one of those people, like me, that has a really big monitor and I have multiple sites open in small windows, you will see it at the bottom.
Got it. Question from Jason about the audience targeting, the AAD dynamic group limitation.
It doesn't say on this source that I can put into the chat. It just is literally that bullet point word for word. So they're not saying whether something's coming or not, but Todd might know more.
No, just this. So the dynamic groups is something that Emily and I have used and are, fought with to solve some things, and we thought that would be great here. But yeah, she pulled that line because she's like, no, it doesn't do that. I'm like, you're wrong. And then we went and read it, and that's exactly.
Yeah.
All right, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I don't want to drain the slides necessarily. If there are specific points we want to make sure we cover, let's do. Otherwise, I'll skip to the summary and the resources if that's okay. That all right?
Away. Yep.
All right. Resources. So I think you've probably heard pretty clearly at this point how to get a dev tenant. So the fourth bullet down about the dev tenant, I think we may die on that hill as a group here. But again, enabling targeted release, targeting your content, thinking about the IA, getting a home site, the info on how to use it, set up global nav, and then Emily, to that technical literacy point, right? Taking stuff that's sitting in company-wide emails and you really using the goodness that is SharePoint News in there, right? Anything else we want to direct people's attention toward?
Just make a dev
tenant.
And
take it that's a no.
Yeah. Make a dev tenant.
Yeah, right. The one key takeaway. So 2 weeks from today, collaboration with external folks using Teams and SharePoint. That'll be our topic next week. We will add to our backlog the CDN conversation. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
I think that was excellent. Anything else that we should can or should tackle before we go? It's 12:59. I know people have to drop off at 1. We're happy to stay on and field a few questions if people have some Q&A.
I think we will try to have the answer to the app bar with external users question in that next one because it's even relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yep. Again, Julie got Ruth's question there. Cool.
Ooh.
I don't. Not known.
I don't think so.
Does
I
October
think
coincide
we should
with
see
the
connections
launch?
sooner, shouldn't we?
Yeah, it's my understanding connections is going to come sooner than that. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting question.
Interesting
Home sites
hypothesis.
came out a long time ago. Now the app bar's here and requires them. But again, what I'm saying is there's a bunch of low-level configuration settings that a lot of these new features that are coming out sit on top of, but the new features are still features in and of themselves. That one configures something and the other consumes something doesn't make them not still separate things, right?
So Julie, to phrase that another way, there's not a hard dependency. I don't need to have connections to have the app bar. Do I need to have the app bar to have connections?
Well, I think the point that the question was, you don't have a choice about the app bar, right? But
you're going to get it, right?
They don't turn on the nav to enable configuration of the global nav, but that doesn't have anything to do with whether the app bar physically shows up or not, right? Like that,
Gotcha.
They have a menu item to edit the global nav. Is the fact that you need to create the global nav so that it's saved somewhere so the Viva connections can use it doesn't have specifically anything to do with the app bar itself. So That's, I guess, what I'm getting at.
Got it. Okay. So to Greg's question, yep, let's take that in our agenda for external collaboration. To Ruth's question, I believe the answer is yes, right? Got to have a home site
Yes.
to see the app bar.
Yep.
And we'll see what happens if you have to have the app bar and you don't have a home site.
That's unanswered.
Yep. We got 6 months to answer that. All right, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for that lively conversation, kind of a high level of engagement on both the survey and the Q&A and the conversation today. Much appreciated all the work that went into this. Thanks for showing up.
Thanks.
Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye.